Yep, that's the man. You very rarely hear about, about professional artists and painters being involved in psychical research. I think it's not really surprising because psychical research is a form of science, even if some people will call it borderline science, or even certain rude and ignorant persons will call it pseudoscience. That's why I was so fascinated by the career of Albert von Keller. He was a Swiss artist who settled in Munich in Bavaria, and became a member of the Munich Psychological Society, which was under the direction of the psychologist and psychical researcher Schreck Notzing. Now, there were other painters who painted occult scenes, spiritual phenomena during the 19th century, quite apart from those who painted and illustrated newspaper and book accounts. So these included the French painter Georges Clarin. Can we have the second image, please? Yep, this is his painting, Apparition. And the Anglo-French painter, James Tissot, who was originally Jacques Joseph from France. And he produced that mezzotint, which was apparently of two spirits who personally appeared to him. As you can see, very accomplished, but also obviously very thought-provoking art. Now, these paintings are the exceptions in the two painters' career. If you look at the bulk of their work, they don't have anything to do with it. I think Clarin was known for Orientalist paintings. Joseph was known for rather racy paintings of sailors chatting up girls they weren't married to on board ships, and then became more serious and also produced Orientalist and also religious paintings. But with Keller devotes his career to trying to paint psychical phenomena or scenes or religious scenes inspired and strongly influenced by his own interest in psychical research. I found out about him through the book Seance, Albert Keller and the Occult. Now, yep, that's the book. It was put together to accompany an exhibition of his work in America, and particularly which toured Boston, Chicago, Indianapolis, New York, and St. Louis from the period 1870 to 1914. And there was this exhibition put on at, I think, the Fry Museum, these works.
Oh, okay.
And but he wasn't all interested solely in hypnotism. He was also interested in classical Christian miracle stories, like the resurrection of Jairus' daughter, powers of mystical healing, and stigmata. And that, yeah. Now, here comes your potted biography. He was born illegitimate in Gölz, Switzerland. His mother was Caroline Keller, and his father, from which she was then divorced, was a Zurich industrialist, Martin Bodmer, fairly soon I come across other people called Bodmer, but that's it. 2 months later, 2 months after his birth in 1844, Caroline and Albert moved to Alsace, Bavaria, before eventually settling down in Bayreuth, where Wagner stages his operas. Then in 1854, they moved to Munich, living in the same building as Franz Hanstingel, a publisher of photographic reproductions of artworks. In 1863, he was accepted into the Maximilianeum, a prestigious school set up by King Maximilian II of Bavaria to support exceptional students. And it was then he also began traveling in Europe. 3 years later, in 1866, he stopped studying parliamentary law and enrolls in drawing classes at the Munich Academy of Fine Arts. 1867, he establishes his first atelier, but soon moves to Arthur von Ramsberg's atelier at the Academy. 1869, participates in the first international arts exhibition of the Munich Künstlergenossenschaft. That's the Artists Society or Artist Comrade Society. He was exhibited alongside Alma Tadema, Bocklin, Delacroix, Corot, Ingres, Manet, Moreau, and others. In other words, he's exhibiting with some real giants of the 19th century from France and Germany and Switzerland. So he's playing with the big boys in a way. 1873, his mother died. He became a founding member of the artist cooperative Allotria for the revolutionaries of the art scene in Munich. 1878, he married Irene von Eichthal, daughter of a prominent Bavarian banker, and established his new atelier. Can we have a, yeah, that's what she looked like, at least then. In 1880, the couple were blessed with the birth of their first child, who sadly died the same day. 1884 saw the birth of his second child, Hans Balthasar. The family began traveling around France and Italy. 1886, he became one of the first members of the Munich Psychologische Gesellschaft. That's the Munich Psychological Society, whose membership includes other artists that became associated with the Munich secession. Again, secessionist movement, iconoclastic movement in the 19th century. He participated in a number of seances organized by the society, some of which he even hosted in his own studio or home. He was fascinated with hypnotism and dreamlike trance states, including somnambulism and catalepsy, which he expressed this interest in his paintings. In 1888, he became an honorary member of the Academy of Fine Arts. 1892 saw him as co-founder and board member of the Artists Association of the Munich secession. 1896, invited to exhibit work in the United States at the St. Louis Annual Exposition. 1897, he was elevated to the nobility by Prince Regent Luitpold. Before then, he was just Albert Keller. Now he's allowed to add von to his name, so he becomes Albert Von Keller. Von is the nobiliary particle. He marks out that you're an aristo in the same way that when you see a D, DE in front of French surnames, again, and, they're aristocracy. In 1906, his son was fatally injured in a shooting accident. There was an accidental discharge of a gun that carried him off. He was invited to attend a traveling exhibition in Buffalo, New York, but he didn't send any works. 1907, his wife, Irene, sadly died in a bout of severe depression. I don't know. I mean, I don't know what caused it, but I think we can fairly imagine that it may well have been distress over the loss of a child. 1908, retrospective of his work by the Munich Secession in the Art and Industry Exhibition Hall. After exhibition, he rented the second workshop, primarily to exhibit his work. 1909, his painting Glücklicher Schwester, exhibited in the Exhibition of Contemporary German Art in New York's Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Art Institute of Chicago, and the Copy Society of Boston. His work was collected by prominent Americans. I'm not showing an image of the Glückliche Schwester because, yeah, it's morbid and depressing. It's basically of a dead woman on a bier. You know, she's gone to meet her maker. You know, I think that's the idea behind it. Yeah, I mean, it's a bit, yeah, it's not to modern tastes, I would say. In 1912, he published a monograph of his life and work was published by the Berlin art critic Hans Rosenhagen. He was invited to participate in the 1915 Panama Pacific International Exposition in San Francisco, but he didn't send work, possibly due to the outbreak of World War I. I'd say that was probably a factor, but yeah. 1920, death. He was buried in the Altersschulliche Friedhof, the old Southern Cemetery in Munich. One of the speakers at his funeral was Dr. Albert Von, the co-founder of the Munich Psychological Society. And there you have his life. Now, he was friends with Nazi, and at the time he was painting and active, intellectuals around Europe and artists were fascinated with the paranormal, with hypnotism, telekinesis, spiritualism, and the occult. Munich was a center of parapsychological research. In the 1920s, after Keller's death, the great German writer Thomas Mann, who came up with the quote about the Nazis: "When you burn books, you burn people." And he attended seances. There was a column in the daily paper in 1923 titled "Occult Erlebnis," occult experience. Other writers fascinated, by the Munich paranormal scene included Rainer Maria Rilke, massive German poet, figure in German poetry. I'm amazed at the idea of a paranormal column in the local paper. I mean, I suppose it'd be like opening the Evening Standard, and there was a regular column there, or the Bristol Evening Post or Western Daily Press, or whatever, and there's a regular column there, talking about seances and astral influences and apparitions being taken that seriously. Spiritualism, many of them saw spiritualism as a defense against philosophical materialism. Now, this was one strand of the symbolist artistic movement, which it's been claimed that it's the first pan-European artistic movement, because it involved artists from Britain, France, Germany, Italy, Poland, going into Russia. Now, many of them, they're threatened by the rise of materialism and the threat of what they say, the mechanistic philosophy. The idea that there is just matter in motion and nothing else. And so they're interested in paranormal research, but they're also interested in occultism and strange mysticism. Can we have the image of Paul Ransom? There. Here you see one of the members of the symbolist movement, painted by, I can't remember who, but it may well be Gogwan, because he was a member of that milieu. He is dressed as a member of the Nabi, who were a mystical sect in France. There was a mixture of high Roman Catholicism and traditional Jewish mysticism, and so you had the Nabis, whose name means in Hebrew prophets, and then you had the elect Cohens. Some of them, like Paul Schufenecker, may I have the next slide, please? Yes, Schufenecker, one of the other symbolist illustrators, drew this illustration from the front page of Madame Blavatsky's The Lotus Blue, the Blue Lotus. Madame Blavatsky, as you know, founder of the Theosophical Society and movement. And then, and part of this intellectual movement was the Salon Rose Plus Croix, the Salon of the Rosy Cross. These people. Now, these were this was an artistic association which exhibited the works of the rebels, the artistic rebels. Article 5 of its constitution stated the order favors first the Catholic ideal and mysticism. After legend, myth, allegory, the dream, the paraphrase of great poetry, and finally all lyricism, the order prefers work which has a mirror-like character of being of superior essence. 6, for greater clarification, here are the subjects which will be welcome, even if the execution is impertinent. 1, Catholic dogma, from Margaritone to Andrea Scacchi. 2, the interpretation of Oriental theogonies except those of the yellow races. I beg your pardon for the dated racial language. Now, Gottfried Keller and his fellow artist in the Munich Psychological Association, Gottfried von Max, wished to create an art linking art, science, and the occult. Keller, Max, and another fellow, Wilhelm von Trubner, were, as I said, members of the Psychological Society, as was the art historian Richard Moltrer. They participated in science, as I said, as student and at home. Can I have the 10th image? There you see, Schrecknotzing. I think he's there. It's all very blurry. I'm sorry about that. But Schrecknotzing and Keller are supposed to be there around the medium. This lady producing ectoplasm, it looks like. Now, as a result of which, Keller produced this painting simply entitled Hypnosis from, yep, there you see, hypnotized woman, hypnotized woman, the hypnotist leaning over her. That was a painting from one of the experiments the society conducted. He also produced another one called Mystic Healing, which also expresses his interest in the miraculous and healings. Can we have the 12th image, please, CJ? Yeah, there you go. That is supposedly a mystical healing going on. The mood, behavior, and gestures of the two female figures in it are taken from illustrations of various types of hysteria of the patient Augustine at the Salpêtrière Asylum, Paris, which was then under the direction of Jean-Martin Charcot. Again, big figure in the history of psychology, on the figure of psychology, right? It was Charcot who invented the notion of hysteria. He wanted to decode its sign language and viewed it as a mental state that was easy to diagnose. Charcot influenced Freud. I think Freud may have worked there. Now, the mystical healing was also a reaction to a book published in Paris by Charcot and Paul Richer called Les Démoniaques dans l'art, Demoniacs in Art, which is, yeah, a bit lurid. Shouldn't laugh. He also produced this image, Incident at a Seance. There you see, it's actually, he depicts an incident, he depicts a real event at one of the seances in his home when a lamp got knocked over and caused a fire. And so you see the flame, people running around and all that. He's basing his works on real experience. He was also fascinated by Christian miracles, but he also sought to explain them scientifically. In the 14th image, which I hope CJ will show now, it's of Christ raising the dead, and he depicts Christ as a mesmeric magnetizer. Now, I know mesmerism was founded, its early precursor of hypnotism, founded in 18th century Paris by the Austrian healer Mesmer. Mesmer worked out that by waving his arms around, he could, he could put people in what we would call an alternative state of consciousness, during which, during which they had powers of clairvoyance, they could diagnose diseases, hypnotism, and other phenomena. Needless to say, there was a big storm about it. The Academy of Sciences in France didn't like him one bit. But he also had his own kind of healing cult, which mostly rich women paid to sit in tubs and be magnetized by him, because all this was supposed to be done through magnetic influence. It was originally called animal magnetism to distinguish it from the mineral magnetism of the lodestone. And in these images, Christ is depicted as a mesmeric healer, according to the science or pseudoscience of the time. Before World War I, death was viewed as a philosophical concept, a borderline experience and historical event by intellectuals. I think this was very much an intellectual, artistic, and literary attitude, rather than the response of the great majority of people to whom it would probably consist of, it would be naturally a heartbreaking loss. But now, there comes to, now we come to his painting, Witch's Sleep. This was based on experiments with the medium Lena. I'm sorry about this. It's lead on its side. It should really be the right way up. Mea culpa, mea culpa. I tried taking it down and correcting it, but no such luck. So yeah, that's it. If you can imagine this at a 45-degree angle with a young lady, young lady in an upright position, yeah, you'll get the idea. You'll get a better idea. Now, he based this on some of his experiments with Lena. He was aware of witches' insensitivity to pain, which he considered to be somnambulism. They're in a kind of hypnotic state or waking hypnotic state, like sleepwalking. Now, the late 19th century was a period of investigation of historic witch trials. You have Michelet in France, writing his books about how witches were really folk healers and herbalists being persecuted by the terrible patriarchal Roman Catholic Church. That view is still held by to this day, obviously, especially by the modern witches and pagans community. But it's not the only explanation. There are others. Keller is concerned with reconstructing a historical event here, but the Sphinx wasn't quite so impressed. Sphinx was a Munich occult review, and they stated that witches were not in a hypnotic sleep. I think Sphinx are probably right. I think if there was an insensitivity to pain, it may well be that these poor souls had already endured so much torture already that the simple receptivity to pain may have just decreased. They may have entered a dissociative state, but on a somnambulant state, in the same way that the victims of terrible sexual abuse can deal with, supposedly deal with it by also becoming dissociated, entering an alternative state. That's my interpretation. I've got no psychological training whatsoever, and so feel free to disregard it if you like, Now, so can we have an image of Lena? Yep, this is Lena. As you can see, there's the painting of her raising her arm, and then you go on, there's the photograph of her on which it's based. So that, I think when you go back, yeah, the first painting, if we may go back just a bit, previous painting, yeah, Lena, it's called the apport of a bracelet, because presumably while she was raising her hand like this, a bracelet materialized. Again, 19th century mediumship, great celebrity mediums all over the place, producing apports, ectoplasms, as well as the usual, as well as materialized spirits themselves, as well as the usual. Oh, yes, the spirits are telling me that so and so, the deceased person had, what's a quiet word? Very interesting time for psychical research. Very exciting time for psychical research. Now, he also painted other mediums. Here's one of Lily, one of the mediums. We could have that. This is Lily, another medium. It's entitled Lily Despiritualized. And this must be, presumably, after the spirits had left her or departed. It was considered a very British work of art, done in the British style. And of course, there you can see sort of the influence of the Pre-Raphaelites, in that you have a beautiful young woman with reddish hair, reddish auburn hair, like many of the women painted by Dante Gabriel Rossetti and the rest of them. And he also painted the famous or infamous Eusapia Palladino. Yep, there she is, looking, well, her expression reminds me a bit of some of the women on Last of the Summer Wine. You don't really want to be doing that. But she obviously one of the very great mediums of the 19th century, who was tested all over Europe. There were people coming to her to sort of examine her to see whether her impressive feats were real or not. There you go. And then you get to the next woman, who is Eva C. There she is. She was a materialization medium who produced spirit heads. She was a figure of controversy because in 1905 she had participated, she went on to participate in similar experiments with with Charles Richet, a French psychology professor. And they also remarked, as you can see here, that the faces she materialized during her seances looked like the front covers of the French magazine Miroir. So, I mean, looking at it, I think it looks like the front cover torn off a magazine. I might be wrong, but I don't think it's the most impressive photograph of a materialized spirit I've seen. Now, yep, there it is, photo of the materialized faces. Now, yep, this is very interesting. Keller's paintings were considered so powerful and accurate that the society also used them in their experiments to hypnotize people. And here you see the hypnotic subject photographed staring at one of his paintings in an attempt to be hypnotized, presumably so that to provoke or evoke some kind of spiritualist response. I don't know whether they were successful, but you've got to look at some nice pictures. After Keller's death, Notzing wrote his obituary in 1921. The counter charges that Keller exploited mediums for painting, just for painting material, or that his work was just a concession to the fashion of occultism. Keller was not interested in exploring the nature of the problem of modernity. Sphinx discussed his discussed his occult paintings, and declared that he depicted phantasms and specters of the somnambulant modern world. They were expressive, through expressive unfinished brushstrokes, which they called psychological painting. Keller also wrote an artistic expert opinion piece on materialization phenomena for Frank Notzing. He's writing, he's writing with his artist hat on, saying, as an artist, This is how I view phenomena like this. He was apparently less interested in reporting occult experiences as in the experiences themselves. He recorded every incidence of them in the world, which was means for him to imply supernatural sensitivity. The artist has his own personal motivations, which he only allows viewers at the time to sense or infer. This was how the Sphinx writers regarded him. Late in his career, he's interested in the aesthetics of spirit photography, and the shadowy blurs in his works at the time represented the reality of spirit apparitions, and he was trying to portray the aura or astral body of the subject. Now, there was even a belief grew up that Keller painted while Keller himself painted while he was in a trance. And Keller nurtured this. He nurtured himself as an artist medium. Now, he claimed that the resurrection, his painting, The Resurrection of Jairus' Daughter of 1886, if we can have that image, please. No, that's not the one. Never mind. No, that's not the one either. Sorry. It's all right. That's Mr. Cookie. That's stigmatization. I'm sorry, Chris. I'd rather mix things up. But there you go. Stay on Mr. Cookie. Stay on the Blessed Mystic for a while. At least we can enjoy that. The raising of Jairus' daughter was revealed to him in a dream after a trip to Italy. And he said it became a passive instrument of the act of artistic creation and painted in autosuggestive states. Very interesting. I mean, several writers themselves will say, several writers and artists themselves will say, look, I started painting. I don't know where it comes from. And someone will say, well, sometimes when I write, modern novelists, will say, I feel like an instrument. I feel like it's coming from elsewhere. What's the wellspring of artistic and literary inspiration? Does it lie within us, or are we just instruments that who benefit from the inspiration of ancient entities like the figure Morpheus in the Neil Gaiman book, The Sandman, which came out in the 90s and became very popular among goths. He was interested in the connection between theatre, music, art, and synesthesia. His crucifixion visions, variant 1, included light phenomena like that of the seance at an ectoplasmic veil. I've got that down as image 23, but it may or not be. I mean, I'm afraid as, Yeah. 1887, going back. Back to the girl with the bandaged heads. Yep, back to her. Keller was interested. In 1887, Keller became interested in the mystical healings and the popular pilgrimages to Cavalier in the North Rhine, in North Rhine-Westphalia, which was dedicated to the Virgin Mary. And there you see a blessed mystic. She's entered an ecstatic state inspired by her devotion to Christ and the Virgin. Keller also painted Stigmatization in 1905. If we can find that, CJ? I'll tell you when you find it. Well, that's the one. Stigmatization. There you see the young lady is holding out the palms of her hands, presumably, showing down to the religious crowd to show that she has received the stigmata, the wounds of Christ on the cross. The background to this is a text by the French doctor Antoine Imbert Gourbet. I hope I'm pronouncing all the French names right. I didn't do French at school, and so if I've mangled them, yeah, please forgive me, you know. He wrote Essays les Stigmatises in 1873, which is followed by the book Les Stigmatisations in 1894 and 1908, Stigmatization. He attempted to refute rationalist views of stigmata. Keller said he takes no sides, but just draws. And there you have that image. Now, he also painted the hypnotic dream dancer, Madeleine Ypet. Can we move on, please? Next image. That's her. That's her. Now, Ypet had been studied by Rodin and Munich's Künstlerhaus. She danced in a hypnotic state during which she believed she took on, or it was believed that she took on the souls of others. She was also studied by Notzing, who believed hypnotism liberated existing talents but did not create new ones. So there you go. I mean, if you have a suppressed talent you're not aware of, hypnotism may well help liberate it and bring it to the surface. She was entirely untrained. Ypet wanted to recreate the fascination of dream and expressionist dance. This woman had no formal training in dance. She just sort of got on stage, entered a somnambulant state, a trance state, and then danced. Yeah, then he also painted the Greek prophetess Cassandra. If we can go look for that slide. That might be her. Yeah, really. I can't. Yeah, I've got lost myself. I do beg your pardon. Now, artists across Europe were, this wasn't just Keller. Artists across Europe painted her because it reflected their own premonition of doom. This was a time, Cassandra was promised prophetic vision and utterance by the Greek god Apollo. Now, if she would return his love, well, she said yes, but no, not really. She just said yes to get the power, and then turned him down. So he added a provision. You're going to be a prophetess, but no one will believe you. And so, we have this image of, the prophet, the lone prophet of doom, saying, woe, woe, and thrice woe, rather like the soothsayer in Pompeii with Frankie Howard, if you can remember that far back, where she used to say, "Oh, woe is coming," and he'd say something like, "Oh, she's off again." That's Cassandra. Now, this is the late 19th century. Germany has upset the power balance in Europe, and the European nations are arming themselves and forging alliances. There is an awareness amongst intellectuals and political observers at the time that there's some cataclysm is coming. there are also massive changes in society. The old order is being upset by the rise of trade unionism, socialism, organized labor. And so there is a feeling very, very much that there's some kind of massive cataclysm on the way. This is why they turn to Cassandra. Alternatively, you find with other symbolists, they paint the Cumaean Sibyl, one of the, again, a prophetess in Roman legend. And again, I think for the same reason, they know that some kind of cataclysm is coming, and they know, and they fear that it's going to bring down the whole of European civilization. Keller himself was pessimistic about the future of painting. He believed that there would be no need for it if color photography was invented. Fortunately, I think those fears are rather were exaggerated, but they were common amongst the intellectuals at the time. People really did wonder what the point of human artists were after the perfection of photography, and he was shown that machines can reproduce images. I have to say I feel the same way about art produced by AIs. There's a question now over whether the use of such tools will result in a vast number of professional artists simply becoming redundant because who needs them when you can simply program a machine? Keller, according to Theodor Göring, no relation to Hermann, I hope, was an aristocrat with his skepticism, hedonism, refinement, lassitude, superiority, and fluctuating mood. Now, this is interesting because it's a description that was also true of many of the aristocrats involved in the Symbolist movement, Symbolist and Decadent movement, especially in the cult of dandyism and the Symbolist cult of luxury.
If you want more, I can get you more.
So
that's all right.
You can imagine, you can imagine him languidly talking with Oscar Wilde, and other artists and writers of that kind. He was, and the book concludes that he was fascinated particularly with materialized ectoplasmic veils and the expanse between somnambulant dream and modern scientific experiment. And that, I hope, that's the end of my formal talk about this fascinating and forgotten artistic figure. Thank you very much for listening.
Hi, Dave. So, artistry inspired by, did he himself participated in experiments in